Well, I'll be damned. Never seen a wild critter act like he's running for mayor. William Harrison squinted through his kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. There on Maple Street, bold as brass, sat a bobcat kitten, not hiding, not skittering away like any sensible wild thing should. Just sitting there, pretty as you please, watching Chuck deliver the morning mail like he was expecting his own package. The little fella had tufted ears black as coal and eyes that seemed too smart for his own good. When Chuck's truck rumbled closer, most creatures would bolt. This one, he chirped, actually chirped, like he was saying howdy. Mrs. Patterson came flying out her front door, phone already pressed to her ear. Animal control? We got a situation on Maple Street. But by the time those flashing lights rounded the corner, that kitten had vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but paw prints and a whole lot of questions. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. William had been running on autopilot for 2 years now, ever since Eleanor passed. Coffee at 6:30 sharp, toast with marmalade, never jam. Eleanor always insisted there was a difference, and 30 minutes of crossword puzzles before his morning walk around the neighborhood. Routine was what kept a man upright when the ground kept shifting beneath his feet. But this bobcat kitten was throwing a wrench into everything he thought he knew about the natural order of things. For 3 days straight, the little critter showed up like clockwork. 7 in the morning when Chuck made his rounds. Noon when the school kids walked home for lunch. 4 in the afternoon when Mrs. Davidson took her ancient beagle for his constitutional. Same spot every time, right there on the grass strip between the sidewalk and Maple Street, sitting pretty as a picture postcard. The neighborhood was split right down the middle about what to do. Half the folks were charmed silly, snapping photos and posting them on that Facebook thing their grandkids were always pestering them about. The other half were scared senseless, convinced the poor thing had rabies or some other awful disease that made wild animals lose their natural fear. "It ain't natural, Bill," Frank Thompson had grumbled yesterday, leaning against William's mailbox like he owned the place. "Wild things should stay wild. Mark my words, that cat's gonna bring trouble." But William couldn't stop watching. There was something about the way the kitten moved, purposeful, like he had somewhere important to be. The neighbors had taken to leaving out little dishes of water and scraps of chicken, treating him like some kind of furry celebrity. They'd even given him a name, Scout. Here's what didn't sit right with William, though. Despite all the feeding and fussing, Scout wasn't getting any fatter. If anything, he looked thinner each day, his ribs starting to show through that beautiful spotted coat. And here's the other thing. Scout never ate a bite of what folks put out for him. Not one blessed morsel. He'd sniff around, sometimes pick up a piece of chicken in his mouth, but then he'd trot off somewhere with it. "Something ain't adding up here," William muttered to Eleanor's photograph on the mantelpiece. In the picture, she was holding a baby raccoon she'd rescued from a storm drain years back, her eyes twinkling with that stubborn compassion that used to drive him half crazy. Animal control had given up trying to catch Scout after the 3rd failed attempt. The little guy was too smart, too quick, and honestly, he wasn't bothering anybody. But William's gut was telling him there was more to this story, a whole lot more. And if 47 years of marriage had taught him anything, it was to trust his gut when something felt off-kilter. The memory hit William like a sucker punch to the gut, triggered by something in the way Scout tilted his head when the neighbors talked to him. It was the same patient, knowing look Eleanor used to get when she'd found another stray that needed helping. That look that said she could see straight through to the heart of things, even when nobody else could. 2 years ago, almost to the day, William had been standing in this very kitchen, watching Eleanor kneel by the back porch steps with a bowl of warm milk and some leftover turkey. She was making those soft clucking sounds she always made when she was trying to coax some frightened creature out of hiding. "Eleanor, for crying out loud, what are you doing now?" he'd called through the screen door, exasperated. She'd been at it for 3 days running, leaving food out for something he couldn't even see. "There's a mama possum under our steps with babies," she'd said without looking up, her voice gentle but firm. "She's hurt bad, Bill. Can't hardly walk. Those babies won't make it if she doesn't get her strength back." William had shaken his head and gone back to his newspaper. "We can't feed every stray that wanders into our yard, Ellie. We'll have the whole neighborhood thinking we're running some kind of wildlife refuge. Besides, the HOA's already sent us 2 warning letters about your unauthorized animal activities." That had gotten her dander up, all right. Eleanor had marched into that kitchen with fire in her eyes, hands on her hips in that way that meant he was about to get a talking to, whether he wanted one or not. "William Harrison, I didn't marry you so you could turn into some heartless old coot who walks past suffering without lifting a finger," she'd snapped. "That mama's got 3 babies depending on her, 3 little lives that didn't ask to be born into this mess of a world. Now I can either help her get strong enough to take care of them proper, or I can let nature take its course and listen to those babies cry themselves to death under our porch." "That's how nature works, Ellie," he'd argued back, feeling stubborn and practical and completely in the right. "Animals don't survive. That's their problem. We start interfering, we're just making them dependent on handouts. What happens when we're not here anymore?" The words had hung in the air between them like a curse. What happens when we're not here anymore? 3 months later, the doctors found the cancer. 6 months after that, Eleanor was gone, and William was learning firsthand what happened when the person you depended on wasn't there anymore. But that day in the kitchen, Eleanor had just gotten quiet in that dangerous way that meant she was about to say something that would stick with him forever. "You know what, Bill? Maybe being dependent on kindness is exactly what saves you sometimes. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe we're supposed to need each other, people, animals, doesn't matter. Maybe that's how we know we're not alone in this world." She'd paused, looking out the window at something he couldn't see. "Besides, who are we to say what's natural and what's not? Is it natural for us to live in houses with heat and running water? Is it natural for us to have doctors who can cut cancer out of our bodies and medicine that keeps our hearts beating? We've been depending on each other's kindness for thousands of years, Bill. It's the most natural thing in the world." He'd wanted to argue with her. Lord knows he'd tried, but deep down he'd known she was right. She was almost always right about these things, even when it drove him up the wall. The possum family had stayed under their porch for 2 weeks. Eleanor had fed them religiously, talking to them like they were old friends, giving them names and worrying over every little cough or sniffle. William had grumbled about it, but he'd also found himself checking the food bowls when Eleanor wasn't looking, making sure they were full. When the mama possum was strong enough, she'd moved her babies to the big oak tree in the Hendersons' backyard. Eleanor had cried a little watching them go. "Promise me something, Bill," she'd said that night, curled up next to him in bed. Her voice had been soft, almost whispery, though neither of them knew yet that she was already sick. "Promise me that when something needs help, really needs help, you won't walk away. You don't have to turn into St. Francis or anything, but don't just walk away." He'd promised, of course. You promise things to your wife of 45 years, especially when she's looking at you with those eyes that see right through to your soul. But if he was being honest with himself, he'd figured it was just Eleanor being Eleanor, soft-hearted and sentimental about critters that would be just fine without human interference. Now, standing in the same kitchen, watching Scout through the same window, William felt the weight of that promise settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Eleanor's voice echoed in his memory, as clear as if she were standing right beside him. "When something needs help, really needs help, you don't walk away." Scout wasn't just some friendly neighborhood mascot. William could see it now, plain as day. The way the kitten kept checking the street, like he was on some kind of schedule. the way he never stayed to eat what people offered him, the way those intelligent eyes seemed to be calculating something, planning something, worrying about something. That little bobcat wasn't looking for handouts. He was working. And if William had learned anything from 47 years of marriage to Eleanor, it was that when something was working that hard to survive, there was usually a damn good reason for it. "All right, Ellie," he whispered to the empty kitchen. "I hear you. I won't walk away." The next afternoon, William made a decision that would have had Eleanor either proud as punch or worried sick about his common sense, maybe both. He was going to follow Scout and find out where that little fellow was taking all the food people kept offering him. He waited until Scout made his usual 4 o'clock appearance, positioning himself behind the Henderson's prize azalea bushes with a clear view of Maple Street. Sure enough, right on schedule, Scout trotted up to the usual spot where Mrs. Davidson had left a small pile of deli turkey. The kitten sniffed it, picked up about half the meat in his mouth, and set off with that purposeful gait William had noticed before. William followed at what he hoped was a discreet distance, feeling every bit the fool. Here he was, a 73-year-old man playing detective with a wild animal, wearing Eleanor's old gardening gloves because they still smelled like her and somehow made him feel braver. If the neighbors saw him skulking around their bushes, they'd probably call the cops instead of animal control. Scout's route took them away from the manicured lawns and tidy sidewalks of riverside estates toward the scrubby no-man's land where the subdivision bumped up against the Angeles National Forest. This was county land, technically, but it had been forgotten by everyone except the real estate developers who kept trying to get permits to build on it. That's where William ran into Frank Thompson. Frank was standing next to a cluster of no trespassing signs that had been stuck into the ground like a miniature forest of warnings. He had his arms crossed and a scowl on his weathered face that could have soured milk. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," Frank said, not bothering to hide his amusement. "You following that damn bobcat, Bill?" William felt his cheeks heat up. "Just taking a walk, Frank." "Last I checked, it was still a free country." "Free country, sure enough. But this here's private property." Frank gestured at the signs. "Developer bought this whole parcel last year, planning to put in another one of those fancy housing developments soon as they get the permits pushed through." "Since when do you care about property rights?" William shot back. Frank had never been one to pay much attention to rules and regulations, especially when they got in the way of his hunting and fishing. Frank's expression darkened. "Since I started paying attention to what happens when folks don't respect boundaries, that cat's gonna bring trouble, Bill. Mark my words. Wild animals that don't act wild. That's nature's way of telling you something's wrong." There was something in Frank's voice that William couldn't quite put his finger on. A note of genuine worry that seemed out of character for a man who'd spent most of his 78 years convinced that the world was going to hell in a handbasket and there wasn't much anyone could do about it. "What kind of trouble?" William asked. Frank was quiet for a long moment, staring off toward the tree line where Scout had disappeared. "The kind that gets people hurt when they stick their noses where they don't belong. The kind that makes folks think they can fix things that ain't meant to be fixed." Before William could ask what the hell that was supposed to mean, Frank had stalked off toward his beat-up pickup truck, leaving William standing alone among the warning signs. But William was nothing if not stubborn. Eleanor used to say it was his most infuriating and his most endearing quality, depending on the circumstances. He pushed through the tall grass and scrub brush, following the faint trail that Scout had taken. The terrain got rougher the closer he got to the forest edge. This wasn't the kind of land that invited casual strollers. It was all rocks and gullies and thorny bushes that grabbed at your clothes and drew blood if you weren't careful. William found himself grateful for Eleanor's thick gardening gloves and wishing he'd worn long pants instead of the shorts that had seemed perfectly sensible back in his air-conditioned kitchen. He'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when he heard it. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to be coming from somewhere underground. At first, he thought it might be traffic from the highway, but the sound was too irregular, too organic. It sounded almost like, "Well, I'll be damned," William muttered, recognition dawning. It was water, moving water, probably a lot of it, flowing through some kind of underground channel. He followed the sound to a depression in the ground where someone had installed a large concrete culvert years ago, probably to manage runoff from the mountains during the rainy season. The culvert disappeared into a tunnel that looked like it ran under the access road and connected to the storm drain system that served the whole area. And there, sitting at the mouth of that tunnel, like a tiny sentinel, was Scout. The Bobcat Kitten looked up at William with those unnervingly intelligent eyes, and for a moment neither of them moved. William had the strangest feeling that Scout was evaluating him, trying to decide whether this particular human could be trusted with whatever secret he was guarding. Then Scout did something that made William's blood run cold. He looked directly at William, made a soft chirping sound that seemed almost like a greeting, and then disappeared into the dark tunnel. William knelt down and peered into the opening. The tunnel was big enough for a man to crawl through, though it wouldn't be comfortable. The sound of running water was louder here, echoing off the concrete walls in a way that made it impossible to tell how far the tunnel extended. More importantly, William could hear something else. Something that made his chest tighten with a mixture of dread and heartbreak. It was the sound of a cat crying. Not Scout. This was a different voice, deeper and more desperate. It was the sound of an animal in pain, and it was coming from somewhere deep in that tunnel. William sat back on his heels, his mind racing. Scout wasn't just carrying food away from the neighborhood for his own benefit. He was feeding someone else. Someone who couldn't come looking for food themselves. Someone who was trapped or hurt or... "Lord Almighty," William whispered, Eleanor's voice echoing in his memory. "What have I stumbled into?" He looked around the empty landscape, weighing his options. He could go back home, call animal control, and let them handle whatever was in that tunnel. That would be the sensible thing to do. The safe thing. Or he could honor the promise he'd made to his wife and not walk away from something that clearly needed help. Scout emerged from the tunnel again, empty-mouthed now, and sat watching William with an expression that seemed almost expectant, like he was waiting to see what this particular human would do with the knowledge he'd been given. William pulled out his cell phone and checked the signal. 1 bar, but it would have to do. He could call for help, but not from here. He'd have to go back to the main road, and by the time he returned with animal control or whoever else might respond, it might be too late for whatever was crying in that tunnel. The sound came again, that heartbreaking wail of distress that seemed to echo not just through the concrete culvert, but straight through William's chest. "All right, Scout," he said quietly. "You got my attention. Now what do you want me to do about it?" William spent a sleepless night wrestling with what he'd discovered, and by dawn he'd made up his mind. He was going back to that tunnel, and this time he was going prepared. He loaded his canvas messenger bag with a powerful LED flashlight, a bottle of water, a first aid kit that hadn't been opened since Eleanor bought it 5 years ago, and a container of the leftover rotisserie chicken he'd picked up from the grocery store. The walk back to the culvert seemed longer in the morning light, maybe because he knew what he was walking toward this time. Scout was already there waiting for him, sitting in exactly the same spot as the day before, like he'd never left. "Morning, little fellow," William said softly. "Ready to show me what's got you so worked up?" Scout chirped once, that same greeting sound that had charmed the whole neighborhood, and padded toward the tunnel entrance. But instead of disappearing into the darkness like before, he stopped and looked back at William, as if making sure the old man was following. William got down on his hands and knees, grateful that Eleanor had bought him those knee pads for gardening last Christmas. The concrete was cold and damp against his palms, and the tunnel smelled like wet earth and something else, something animal and wild and not altogether pleasant. He clicked on the flashlight and crawled forward, following Scout's small form ahead of him. The tunnel was longer than he'd expected, maybe 50 feet, sloping gently downward toward what must be the main storm drainage system. The sound of running water got louder as they went deeper, echoing off the walls in a way that made William's teeth ache. About halfway through, Scout stopped and turned to face him again. In the beam of William's flashlight, the kitten's eyes reflected back like two golden coins. Then Scout chirped softly and stepped aside as if he was presenting something. That's when William saw her. The adult bobcat was pressed against the far wall of a wider chamber where several drainage pipes converged. She was breathing in short, shallow pants, and even in the uncertain light of his flashlight, William could see that she was in bad shape. Her left rear leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and the fur around it was matted with what looked like dried blood. But that wasn't the shock that nearly knocked William flat on his back. Curled against the mother's belly, so small they looked like they should still have their eyes closed, were two more kittens. They were moving weakly, making tiny mewling sounds that tugged at something deep in William's chest. Scout trotted over to his family and dropped the piece of chicken he'd been carrying at his mother's nose. She lifted her head just enough to sniff it, but didn't make any move to eat. Instead, she looked directly at William, and in those pain-dulled eyes, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat: recognition. And more than that, a plea. "Oh, honey," William whispered, not sure if he was talking to the mother cat or to Eleanor's memory or to God himself. "How long have you been down here?" Scout chirped again, louder this time, and William realized with a jolt that the kitten was trying to tell him something. All those trips to the neighborhood, all that food he'd carried back here. Scout wasn't a charming mascot looking for handouts. He was a son trying to keep his family alive. The full weight of it hit William like a physical blow. This little bobcat, barely old enough to be away from his mother, had been making daily supply runs into enemy territory, the world of humans and cars and dogs and all the things that wild animals were supposed to fear. He'd been risking his life every single day, getting thinner and more desperate because his mother couldn't hunt and his siblings couldn't survive without her. "You brave little son of a gun," William breathed. "You've been taking care of everybody, haven't you?" He played the flashlight beam over the makeshift nest the mother had created in the widest part of the chamber. It was constructed of dried grass, leaves, and what looked like scraps of fabric, probably things that had washed down through the storm drains over the years. She'd made the best shelter she could with what was available, but it was no place for a nursing mother with babies. William studied the mother's injured leg more carefully. It wasn't a clean break. The bone looked like it had been crushed, and the swelling suggested infection had set in. Without proper medical attention, she was going to die. And when she died, those babies would die too, no matter how hard Scout worked to keep them fed. The mother bobcat was still watching him, and William had the eerie sensation that she understood exactly what he was thinking. There was intelligence in those eyes, and something that looked almost like hope. "I don't know how much you understand," William said quietly, "but I'm going to help you, all of you. I just need to figure out how." He backed out of the tunnel carefully, his mind racing. This wasn't something he could handle alone, and it sure as hell wasn't something animal control was equipped for. He needed a wildlife veterinarian, and he needed one fast. Back in the sunlight, William pulled out his phone and started making calls. The first 3 veterinary clinics he tried either didn't handle wildlife or weren't available for emergency calls. The 4th one, a small practice on the other side of Riverside, transferred him to someone named Dr. Sarah Mitchell. "Dr. Mitchell speaking. Ma'am, my name is William Harrison, and I've got an emergency situation with a Bobcat family. The mother's badly injured, and there are babies involved." There was a pause. "Where are you located, Mr. Harrison?" "Riverside, near the Angeles National Forest. They're trapped in a storm drain system, and the mother's leg is in bad shape. Real bad." "How do you know about the condition of the leg?" William hesitated. "Because I crawled in there and had a look. I know it sounds crazy, but this family's been surviving off food that one of the babies has been carrying to them from my neighborhood. He's been—" William's voice cracked a little. "He's been keeping them alive all by himself." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not go back into that tunnel. An injured mother with babies is extremely dangerous, even if she seems docile. I'm going to give you my exact location, and I need you to meet me there. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Mr. Harrison, you did the right thing by calling. We'll figure this out." As William walked back toward his car, Scout appeared at his side, trotting along like they were old friends out for a morning constitutional. The kitten looked up at him with those two intelligent eyes, and William could swear there was gratitude in them. "Don't you worry, little fellow," William said. "Help's coming. Your mama's going to be just fine." But even as he said the words, William wondered if he was making a promise he couldn't keep. The mother's condition had looked serious, possibly too serious for even the best veterinary care. And there was still the question of what would happen to Scout and his siblings if the worst occurred. One thing at a time, he told himself. That's what Eleanor always used to say when life got overwhelming. One thing at a time, and trust that the next right step would show itself when you needed it. As they reached the edge of the subdivision, Scout stopped following and sat down in the tall grass, watching William go. The kitten would go back to his family now, William knew, to wait and hope and keep trying to take care of everyone, the only way he knew how. "I'll be back," William called over his shoulder. "I promise." And this time he meant to keep his word. Dr. Sarah Mitchell turned out to be a compact woman in her early 40s, with calloused hands, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from dealing with frightened animals and panicked owners on a daily basis. She met William at her clinic, a converted house on the outskirts of Riverside that smelled like antiseptic and wet dog food. "Before we go anywhere, Mr. Harrison, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with," she said, loading medical supplies into a large canvas bag. "You said the mother has a leg injury. Can you describe it in detail?" William did his best to explain what he'd seen in the tunnel, trying to remember everything about the angle of the leg, the swelling, the way the mother had been breathing. Dr. Mitchell listened without interrupting, but he could see her expression growing more serious with each detail. "That sounds like a compound fracture with secondary infection," she said finally. "How long do you think she's been down there?" "I don't know for sure, but Scout's been coming to the neighborhood for almost a week now. Maybe longer." "Scout?" "That's what we've been calling the little one who's been bringing them food. He's been making trips out every day, carrying back whatever the neighbors leave for him." Dr. Mitchell stopped packing and looked at William with something that might have been amazement. "A juvenile bobcat has been traveling into a human residential area daily to gather food for his family?" "Yes, ma'am. Regular as clockwork. 7 in the morning, noon, and 4 in the afternoon. That's—" she shook her head. "That's extraordinary behavior. Bobcats that young shouldn't have the survival skills for that kind of strategic thinking, let alone the courage to approach human habitation repeatedly." While Dr. Mitchell finished gathering her supplies, William called Frank Thompson. He needed someone with a truck who could help transport equipment, and despite yesterday's tension, Frank was the only person he could think of who might be willing to get involved in something this unconventional. "Frank, it's Bill Harrison. I need your help with something." "Let me guess. This is about that damn bobcat." "Frank, there's a whole family of them trapped in the storm drain system. The mother's hurt bad, and there are babies." They're going to die if we don't do something." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Frank finally spoke, his voice was quieter than William had ever heard it. "What kind of hurt?" "Looks like her leg got crushed somehow. Dr. Mitchell thinks it's infected." Another pause. "Dr. Mitchell?" "Wildlife veterinarian. She's coming out to help, but we need someone with a truck to carry equipment." "Bill," Frank's voice trailed off, and William could hear something in it that he couldn't identify. "How bad is the leg?" "Pretty bad, Frank. Why?" "I'll meet you at the culvert in 20 minutes. The line went dead, leaving William staring at his phone. There had been something in Frank's voice, a note of what sounded almost like guilt that didn't make sense, but there wasn't time to puzzle it out. Dr. Mitchell was loading the last of her equipment into her van, and the afternoon was wearing on. Back at the tunnel site, Frank was already waiting when they arrived. He'd brought not just his truck but also a portable generator, work lights, and what looked like enough rope to climb Mount Everest. His face was grim, and he barely acknowledged William's thanks. "How are we going to do this?" William asked Dr. Mitchell as she surveyed the tunnel entrance. "Very carefully," she replied. "The biggest risk is that the mother will panic when she sees us coming. An injured animal is unpredictable, even one that's too weak to put up much of a fight. We need to sedate her before we try to move her." "How are you going to get close enough to sedate her?" Dr. Mitchell pulled a specialized dart gun from her bag. "Remote injection. It's not ideal in a confined space like this, but it's our best option." Frank spoke up for the first time since they'd arrived. "What about the babies?" "We'll have to handle them by hand. At that age, they won't have developed their fear response fully. The bigger concern is keeping them warm and getting them to their mother as quickly as possible once she's sedated." William watched Dr. Mitchell check her equipment one more time, her movements precise and professional. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at the tunnel entrance like she was calculating odds she didn't like. "Doc," he said quietly, "what are the chances?" She met his eyes directly. "For the mother, if the infection hasn't spread too far and if we can stabilize the fracture, maybe 60%. For the babies, better odds if we can keep them with her. For Scout," she paused. "Scout's been through a trauma that would break most adult animals, but he's shown remarkable resilience. I think he'll be fine, physically." "What about the other way? Emotionally, I mean." Dr. Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "Animals grieve, Mr. Harrison. They form attachments. They feel loss. If his mother doesn't make it, Scout will need time to process that. But bobcats are survivors. With proper rehabilitation, he could be released back into the wild eventually." Frank had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation. Finally, he couldn't contain himself any longer. "This is my fault," he said abruptly. William and Dr. Mitchell turned to stare at him. "What do you mean, your fault?" William asked. Frank's weathered face had gone pale, and his hands were shaking slightly. "I used to set snares back in these woods, years ago when I was still hunting regular. Set them for rabbits mostly, sometimes foxes. I thought I'd gotten them all pulled up when I quit, but—" He gestured helplessly toward the tunnel. "Sounds like maybe I missed one." The words hung in the air like an accusation. William felt something cold settle in his stomach as understanding dawned. "You think she got caught in one of your old snares?" "Compound fracture, you said. Crushed bone. That's what happens when an animal fights a snare long enough. They panic, they twist, they—" Frank's voice broke. "Jesus, Bill. She could have been trapped for days before she finally got loose. Days of fighting and twisting and—" Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Thompson, guilt isn't going to help her now. If you want to make amends, help us get her out of there." Frank nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes." As they prepared to enter the tunnel, William found himself thinking about Eleanor again. She'd always said that the hardest part of helping others wasn't the physical work, it was carrying the weight of their pain. Right now, he could feel that weight settling on all three of them. Dr. Mitchell with her professional concern, Frank with his crushing guilt, and himself with the knowledge that he'd waited too long to act. But Scout was still down there in that tunnel, still trying to hold his family together through sheer force of will, and that little bobcat deserved better than adults who gave up before they even tried. "All right," William said, picking up the rope. "Let's go bring them home." In the distance, thunder rumbled. The weather forecast had called for evening storms, and the sky was already darkening with heavy clouds. If they were going to do this, they needed to do it fast. Time was running out, and they all knew it. The rescue operation began just as the first fat raindrops started hitting the ground above them. Frank had rigged work lights throughout the tunnel system, turning the claustrophobic concrete space into something that looked like an underground surgical suite. The generator hummed steadily outside, barely audible over the growing rumble of thunder. Dr. Mitchell went in first, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd done this kind of work before. William followed, carrying the emergency medical kit, while Frank stayed at the entrance to manage the equipment and watch for any sign that the storm drain system was starting to flood. Scout was waiting for them in the main chamber, positioned protectively between his family and the approaching humans. When he saw William, he chirped once, a sound that somehow managed to convey both greeting and warning. "It's okay, little fellow," William whispered. "We're here to help." The mother bobcat's condition had deteriorated since William's first visit. Her breathing was more labored, and she barely lifted her head when the lights illuminated the chamber. The two smaller kittens were still pressed against her belly, but their movements seemed weaker, less coordinated. Dr. Mitchell knelt about 10 feet away from the family, loading the dart gun with smooth, practiced movements. "The sedative will take about 5 minutes to take full effect," she said quietly. "Once she's unconscious, we'll have maybe an hour to get her stabilized and moved before it starts wearing off. What about Scout and the babies? We handle them after we secure the mother. They'll follow her scent, and as long as we keep them together, they should be—" A crack of thunder directly overhead cut her off, followed immediately by the sound of rain hitting the ground above them with increasing intensity. From the tunnel entrance, Frank called out urgently. "Water levels rising fast, storm drains starting to back up." Dr. Mitchell didn't hesitate. She raised the dart gun, aimed carefully, and fired. The tranquilizer dart hit the mother bobcat in the shoulder, and she jerked once before settling back down. Her eyes remained open, watching them with a mixture of pain and resignation that made William's chest ache. 5 minutes, Dr. Mitchell said, already unpacking her medical supplies. "We need to be ready to move the second she's under." Those 5 minutes felt like an hour. The sound of rushing water was getting louder, echoing through the tunnel system as storm drains throughout the area began to overflow. William could see a thin stream of water starting to flow along the bottom of the main channel, carrying debris from the streets above. Scout seemed to sense the danger, too. He moved closer to his mother, nuzzling her face and making soft, chirping sounds that sounded almost like reassurance. The sight of that little bobcat trying to comfort his dying mother while floodwater rose around them nearly broke William's heart. "She's out," Dr. Mitchell announced, checking the mother's pupils with a small flashlight. "Help me get her positioned so I can examine the leg." The injury was worse than any of them had imagined. The leg wasn't just broken, it was mangled, with bone fragments visible through infected tissue that smelled like death. Dr. Mitchell worked quickly, cleaning the wound and injecting antibiotics, but William could see the grim expression on her face. "Can you save it?" he asked. "The leg's gone," she said bluntly. "Has been for days. The infection's already starting to spread. If we don't amputate now, she'll be dead within hours." You can do surgery here? I don't have a choice. Moving her in this condition would kill her, and we're running out of time anyway. She gestured toward the rising water. Frank, I need you in here. We're doing field surgery! Frank squeezed through the tunnel entrance, his face pale but determined. What do you need? Hold this light steady and don't ask questions. Dr. Mitchell was already assembling surgical instruments with the efficiency of someone who'd worked in crisis situations before. Mr. Harrison, can you keep the babies calm while I work? William gathered the two smaller kittens carefully, amazed by how tiny and fragile they felt in his hands. They mewed pitifully, seeking their mother's warmth, but didn't struggle. Scout watched his every movement with those unnervingly intelligent eyes, as if evaluating whether this human could be trusted with his siblings. It's okay, Scout, William murmured. She's going to be all right. We're going to take care of all of you. The surgery took 43 minutes. William knew because he watched every second tick by on his watch while Dr. Mitchell worked with steady hands to remove the infected tissue and amputate the ruined leg. Frank held the lights without wavering, even when the smell and sight of the procedure made him turn green around the gills. All the while, the water kept rising. It was ankle-deep now, flowing faster as the storm above them intensified. Frank had positioned planks and crates to create a dry platform for the surgery. But it was clear they were fighting a losing battle against time and physics. Almost done, Dr. Mitchell said, her voice tight with concentration. Just need to close and bandage. That's when Scout did something that made William's blood run cold. The kitten suddenly arched his back, his fur standing on end, and let out a sound that was part warning, part terror. He was staring at the tunnel entrance with an expression of pure panic. What's wrong with him? Frank asked. William listened carefully, trying to hear whatever had spooked Scout. Then he heard it, a deep, rumbling roar that seemed to be coming from somewhere upstream in the drainage system. It was the sound of a massive volume of water moving fast, picking up debris and momentum as it went. Flash flood, Frank said, his voice barely audible over the growing noise. The whole system's backing up. We've got maybe 2 minutes before this place turns into a washing machine. Dr. Mitchell's hands never stopped moving, even as the water swirled around their makeshift platform. 30 more seconds. I just need 30 more seconds. The roaring was getting louder, and William could feel the current tugging at his legs. Scout had grabbed one of his smaller siblings by the scruff and was trying to drag it toward higher ground, following instincts older than civilization. "Doc, we need to go now!" Frank shouted. "Got it!" Dr. Mitchell finished the last bandage and scooped up the unconscious mother in her arms. "Everyone out! Now!" The evacuation was chaos. Frank went first, carrying the medical equipment and pulling a rope behind him. William followed with the two small kittens tucked inside his jacket, while Dr. Mitchell brought up the rear with the sedated mother. Scout brought himself, moving with the fluid grace of a wild animal navigating treacherous terrain. Even in the midst of the crisis, William marveled at the kitten's composure. He was barely old enough to be away from his mother, but he was handling this emergency better than most adult humans would. They reached the tunnel entrance just as a wall of muddy water came roaring down the main channel, carrying branches, trash cans, and other debris from the flooded streets above. If they'd waited another minute, they would have been swept away. In the fading daylight, with rain still falling steadily, Dr. Mitchell quickly transferred the mother bobcat to a heated carrier in her van. The two small kittens went into a smaller carrier with warming blankets, while Scout sat on the tailgate, watching everything with those golden eyes that seemed to see and understand far too much. "Is she going to make it?" William asked, watching the mother's shallow breathing through the carrier's mesh door. Dr. Mitchell checked her watch and made notes on a clipboard. "The next 24 hours will tell." The surgery went well, considering the circumstances. But she's lost a lot of blood, and the infection was advanced. She's a fighter, though. Any animal that could survive what she's been through has the will to live. Frank stood a little apart from the group, staring at the flooded tunnel entrance. "I should have checked those snares more carefully," he said quietly. "Should have made sure I got them all." "Shoulda, coulda, woulda," William replied, using one of Eleanor's favorite expressions. "You can't undo the past, Frank, but you helped save them today. That's what matters now." As they prepared to leave for Dr. Mitchell's clinic, Scout made one last circuit around the area where his family had been trapped. He paused at the tunnel entrance, now completely underwater, and let out a soft chirp that sounded almost like goodbye. Then he trotted over to William and sat down at his feet, looking up with an expression that seemed to say, "What happens next?" 3 days into the recovery period, Dr. Mitchell called William with news that made his stomach drop to his boots. The mother Bobcat, whom the clinic staff had started calling Meadow, was responding well to treatment, her infection clearing and her appetite returning. The 2 smaller kittens were thriving under round-the-clock care, growing stronger each day. But there had been a development that changed everything. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to come to the clinic," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice carefully neutral in a way that made William's blood pressure spike. "There's something we discovered during our examination of the kittens that you need to know about." "What kind of something?" "I'd rather explain in person. Can you be here within the hour?" William made the drive in 45 minutes, his mind racing through every possible disaster scenario. When he arrived at the clinic, he found Dr. Mitchell waiting in her office with a grim expression and a manila folder thick with papers. "Sit down, Mr. Harrison," she said gently. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult." William's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Just say it, Doc." "When we ran blood work on the kittens, we found something unusual. Traces of anticoagulant poison, rat poison specifically. The 2 smaller kittens had elevated levels, but Scout—" She paused, consulting her notes. "Scout's levels were off the charts." "Poison?" William felt like the room was spinning. "How is that possible?" "Someone has been putting out rat poison in the area where the family was living. Based on the levels in Scout's system, he's been consuming it regularly for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer." The implications hit William like a physical blow. He was eating poisoned food and then carrying clean food back to his family? That's what it looks like. Somehow, Scout was able to distinguish between contaminated and safe food sources. He was protecting his family by consuming the dangerous food himself. William stared at Dr. Mitchell, trying to process what she was telling him. The little bobcat hadn't just been risking his life by venturing into human territory. He'd been deliberately poisoning himself to keep his family safe. "Will he be okay?" Dr. Mitchell's expression grew even more serious. "We've started him on vitamin K therapy to counteract the anticoagulant effects, but the damage may already be done. The poison affects blood clotting, and Scout's been consuming it for weeks. Any internal injury, any significant stress to his system—" "What are you saying, Doc?" "I'm saying that Scout is living on borrowed time. The next few days will determine whether the treatment can reverse the damage or whether the poison has done permanent harm to his organs." William felt tears stinging his eyes. After everything that brave little cat had been through, after all the risks he'd taken to save his family, the possibility that he might not survive was almost too much to bear. "Can I see him?" Dr. Mitchell led him to a recovery room where Scout was resting in a small enclosure. The kitten looked smaller than William remembered, his spotted coat dull and his breathing slightly labored. But when he saw William, Scout lifted his head and made that familiar chirping sound, weaker now but still unmistakably a greeting. "Hey there, little hero," William whispered, kneeling beside the enclosure. "You just hang in there, you hear me? You've got too much living left to do." Scout moved closer to the mesh barrier between them, and William was startled to see something that looked almost like recognition in those golden eyes. More than recognition, gratitude. "He knows you saved his family," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "Animals understand more than we give them credit for." That evening, William drove out to the area where they'd found the Bobcat family, determined to locate the source of the poison. Frank met him there, carrying a metal detector and wearing the expression of a man on a mission of penance. "I've been thinking about this all day," Frank said. "If someone's been putting out rat poison in these woods, there's got to be signs of it. Bait stations, scattered pellets, something." They searched methodically, using flashlights to examine every square foot of ground near the tunnel site. It was Frank who found the first evidence: a plastic bait station hidden under a fallen log, its lid partially chewed open. "Son of a bitch," Frank muttered, carefully extracting the device. "This is commercial-grade stuff. Whoever put this out knew what they were doing." They found 3 more bait stations within a quarter-mile radius, all strategically placed near what looked like animal trails. Someone had made a deliberate effort to poison wildlife in the area, probably to clear it for development. "The property developer," William said suddenly. "Remember those no trespassing signs? Someone wanted the wildlife gone before they started building." Frank's face darkened. "If that's true, if someone deliberately poisoned these woods knowing there were families of animals living here, then we need to report it to the authorities," William finished. "This isn't just about Scout and his family anymore. This is about every animal that calls these woods home." The next morning brought more devastating news. Dr. Mitchell called just after dawn, her voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to come to the clinic immediately. We lost one of the smaller kittens during the night." William's heart sank. "The poison?" "Internal bleeding. We did everything we could, but the damage was too extensive." "The other kitten is stable for now, but—" Her voice trailed off. "What about Scout?" "Scout is fighting. His levels are starting to improve, but he's taken a turn for the worse emotionally. He knows his sibling is gone, and he's not responding to treatment the way we hoped." When William arrived at the clinic, he found Scout huddled in the back corner of his enclosure, refusing food and water. The kitten's eyes had lost their spark of intelligence and curiosity, replaced by something that looked heartbreakingly like despair. "He's grieving," Dr. Mitchell explained. "In the wild, bobcat families are incredibly close-knit. The loss of a sibling at this age can be devastating." William knelt beside the enclosure again, his heart breaking at the sight of Scout's obvious distress. "What can we do?" Sometimes, with traumatized wildlife, the best medicine is contact with their own kind. Meadow is strong enough now to be reunited with her surviving kittens. It might help Scout to be with his mother again. The reunion took place in a larger enclosure that afternoon. Meadow, moving awkwardly on 3 legs but with determination, immediately went to her surviving babies. She nuzzled the smaller kitten first, then turned her attention to Scout. What happened next brought tears to everyone's eyes. Scout, who had been listless and unresponsive for hours, suddenly came alive. He pressed against his mother, making soft, chirping sounds, and for the first time since the rescue, he seemed like a kitten again, instead of a tiny adult carrying the weight of the world. But even as William watched the family reunion with joy, he couldn't shake the knowledge that they weren't out of the woods yet. Scout was still fighting the effects of the poison, and there was no guarantee that any of them would fully recover from their ordeal. The investigation into the illegal poisoning was moving forward, with state wildlife officials taking statements and collecting evidence. The property developer was already facing questions about his plans for the area, and there was talk of criminal charges if the poisoning could be proven intentional. But for William, Standing outside that enclosure and watching a mother cat comfort her traumatized son, the larger questions of justice and accountability seemed less important than the simple miracle of survival. Scout was alive. His family was together. And sometimes, William thought, that had to be enough to start with. The real test would come in the days ahead, when they learned whether love and medical care could overcome the damage that human cruelty had inflicted on one small family just trying to survive. 6 weeks later, on a crisp October morning that reminded William of the day he'd first seen Scout greeting the mailman, Dr. Mitchell called with the news they'd all been hoping for. "They're ready," she said simply. "All three of them. Meadow has adapted beautifully to life on 3 legs, and both kittens are strong enough for release. The poison is completely out of Scout's system, and his blood work is normal." William felt a surge of emotion that caught him off guard, joy mixed with something that felt suspiciously like loss. Over the past month and a half, he'd visited the clinic almost daily, watching Scout and his family recover and grow stronger. The little bobcat had regained his spark, his curiosity, and that uncanny intelligence that had first drawn William to him. But William knew that saying goodbye was the whole point of the rescue. Wild animals belonged in the wild, not in enclosures, no matter how comfortable. "Where will you release them?" he asked. "There's a protected area about 40 miles north of here in the Angeles National Forest. It's far from any development, with plenty of natural prey and water sources. The state wildlife department has already given approval." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, if you'd like to be there. I thought you might want to see them off." That evening, William sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee and Eleanor's photograph, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind of activity. Veterinary visits, legal proceedings against the property developer, and organizing community meetings about wildlife protection. The neighborhood had rallied around Scout's story in a way that had surprised everyone, with people who'd never given much thought to wildlife suddenly passionate about protecting it. Frank Thompson had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. The gruff former hunter had thrown himself into wildlife advocacy with the fervor of a convert, spending his days removing old traps and snares from the forest and his evenings researching bobcat behavior and habitat needs. The guilt over Meadow's injury had become a driving force for positive change, and Frank was now the unofficial leader of the neighborhood's new Wildlife Protection Committee. "Well, Ellie," William said to the photograph, "tomorrow's the big day. Our little friend goes home." He paused, stroking the frame gently. "I think you would have loved him. He's got your stubborn streak and your big heart." The release site was a meadow surrounded by oak trees, with a clear stream running along one edge and rocky outcroppings that would provide perfect denning sites for a bobcat family. Dr. Mitchell and her team had arrived early to set up, while William and Frank waited nearby with a small group of neighbors who'd insisted on witnessing Scout's return to freedom. The transport carriers were positioned at the edge of the meadow about 50 yards from the tree line. The plan was to open all 3 carriers simultaneously and allow the family to emerge together, giving them the choice of when and how to enter their new territory. "Remember," Dr. Mitchell addressed the group quietly, "no sudden movements, no calling out. We want this to be as stress-free as possible for them." William found himself holding his breath as Dr. Mitchell and her assistant approached the carriers. Through the mesh, he could see Scout peering out with those golden eyes that had become so familiar, while Meadow crouched protectively over her surviving kitten. The carriers opened with soft clicks that seemed unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Meadow emerged first, moving with the careful grace of an animal testing new ground. Her missing leg didn't seem to slow her down. She'd adapted to 3-legged locomotion with the resilience that had kept her alive in that dark tunnel. Scout came next, stepping out cautiously and immediately scanning the area with the wariness of a creature that had learned early that the world could be dangerous. His sibling followed close behind, staying near their mother's flank. The family stood together at the edge of the meadow for several minutes, processing the sights and sounds and smells of their new home. William could see Scout's ears swiveling as he catalogued every detail: the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, the scent of other wildlife that had passed through the area. Then something magical happened. Scout suddenly seemed to remember what he was. Not a neighborhood curiosity or a patient in a veterinary clinic, but a wild bobcat in his natural habitat. His posture changed, becoming more fluid and predatory. He crouched low and began to stalk something in the grass, his attention completely focused on the hunt. "He's tracking a field mouse," Dr. Mitchell whispered, her voice full of professional satisfaction. "Perfect instincts." Meadow watched her son for a moment, then began her own exploration of the area, teaching the younger kitten how to move silently through the underbrush. It was a masterclass in bobcat behavior, and William realized he was witnessing something that few humans ever got to see: a wild family resuming their natural lives. As the morning progressed, the bobcat family gradually moved deeper into the forest. Scout made several forays back toward the group of humans, as if checking to make sure they were still there. But each time he ventured a little farther from the meadow and stayed away a little longer. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, Scout appeared at the edge of the tree line one last time. He sat in a patch of dappled sunlight, looking directly at William with an expression that seemed almost human in its intelligence and complexity. For a moment, that felt suspended in time, the old man and the young bobcat regarded each other across the space between their two worlds. William could swear he saw recognition in those golden eyes, and something that looked like gratitude. Then Scout chirped once, that same greeting sound that had charmed Maple Street all those weeks ago, turned and disappeared into the forest to rejoin his family. William felt tears running down his cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of completion, of a promise kept, of a life well lived in service to something larger than himself. "They'll be fine," Dr. Mitchell said softly, appearing at his elbow. "All three of them." Meadow's proven she can hunt and provide for her family even with the disability, and Scout has survival instincts that would make a Navy SEAL jealous. "What happens now?" William asked. "Now they live their lives the way they were meant to, as wild bobcats in a protected forest. They'll hunt, they'll find mates when they're old enough, they'll raise their own families. Scout will pass on what he learned about survival and resourcefulness to his own kittens someday." As the group began to pack up their equipment, Frank Thompson approached William with something that looked like a small wooden plaque. "Made this for you," Frank said gruffly, clearly embarrassed. "Thought you might want something to remember them by." The plaque was beautifully crafted, with an image of a bobcat burned into the wood and elegant script below that read, "In memory of Eleanor Harrison, who taught us that love has no species, and in honor of Scout, who taught us that heroes come in all sizes." William's throat tightened as he read the inscription. "Frank, this is beautiful. Thank you." "Ellie would have been proud of what you did," Frank said. "Hell, I'm proud of what you did. That little cat's alive because you paid attention when the rest of us just saw a cute stray." 6 months later, William was working in Eleanor's garden when he heard a familiar sound from the edge of the forest. He looked up to see a figure sitting in the shade of the big oak tree that marked the boundary between his property and the wild land beyond. It was Scout, now fully grown and magnificent in his adult coat. The young bobcat sat watching William work, just as he had once sat watching the neighbors of Maple Street. But this time, there was no need for rescue, no desperate mission to fulfill. This was simply a visit from an old friend. William set down his gardening tools and walked slowly toward the tree. Scout didn't run. Instead, he stood and chirped once, that same greeting that had started their entire adventure. "Well, hello there," William said softly. "Look how you've grown." Scout approached to within about 10 feet, close enough for William to see the confidence and wildness in his eyes, but far enough to maintain the proper distance between their two worlds. He was exactly what he was supposed to be, a magnificent wild creature, free and strong and alive. In the distance, William could hear other sounds from the forest, the calls of Scout's family, perhaps his own mate and kittens by now. The young bobcat heard them too, his ears swiveling toward the sounds of home and responsibility. Scout looked at William one more time, then turned and bounded back into the forest with the fluid grace of an animal completely at home in his world. William stood by the oak tree for a long time, watching the forest and thinking about the strange and wonderful ways that lives intersect. "Some angels," he thought, remembering Eleanor's words, "do indeed come with fur and tufted ears. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they remember to visit. What if I told you that the greatest heroes in this world don't wear capes or carry badges? They simply show up when someone needs them most." This story of Scout, a tiny bobcat who risked everything to save his family, reminds us that love knows no boundaries, and that sometimes our most meaningful moments come when we choose compassion over convenience. William Harrison, at 73, could have walked past that cute stray like everyone else. Instead, he listened to his late wife Eleanor's voice echoing in his heart. When something needs help, you don't walk away. That choice, to pay attention, to care, to act, transformed not just Scout's family, but an entire community. It gave William purpose beyond his grief and showed Frank Thompson that it's never too late for redemption. As we navigate our golden years, facing loss and wondering if our best days are behind us, Scout's story whispers a beautiful truth. Our capacity to make a difference doesn't diminish with age. It deepens with wisdom. Every day offers us a chance to be someone's hero, to honor the memory of those we've loved, and to discover that saving others often saves ourselves. What moment in your life reminded you that you still had more love to give? Have you ever found unexpected purpose after experiencing loss? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've made a difference in someone's life.